Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and we are back again with a brand new beginner deck tech. This time we're taking a look at the British, and oh boy, let's just start off by saying Britain's a bit rough on a budget. A lot of their decks are reliant on a number of elites and also many specials to really perform at their highest peak. So it is going to be interesting to further expand this, and I'm going to give some directions on how we can take it cheaply. But for right now, let's just take a look at the basic deck list. So this is like the original German budget deck. This is a deck that is made up of the cards you start the game with, and then you have to reach level 7 with your ally nation, which is Japan, and then level 9 with your main nation, which is Britain. This will give us a handful of elites, specials, and also a few wild cards to use. So anybody that is from starting out the game can practically build this after 20 minutes of playing. So this should hopefully be highly useful to those people. This deck is generally, I would say, a slower control deck. Probably the biggest issue, I would say, is that we lack like a really strong win condition, which I'll explain how we can possibly improve that in a minute, but let's quickly go over the cards and their usefulness in the deck. So Desert Rats is a very cheap order, deal 1 damage and pin. It's not the strongest thing, but again, just having a cheap way to ping something off can be very useful, and that pin can help you delay. For a new player, this can be very useful against like some big infantry or a big tank the enemy plays down. We have Resolute Defense. Resolute Defense is definitely not the strongest of cards, but because we're on such a tight budget, we've kind of built around a lot of guards in our deck just naturally, and Resolute Defense can actually be kind of useful in that regard. With Resolute Defense just turning our guards into significantly stronger units. And as a new player, this will actually be quite hard for the enemy to deal with. Giving a guard, +3 health can turn them into 9, 10 health units that are just hard to kill. So it's not the strongest card, but for what we need right now, it's okay. We have the first Airborne. The first Airborne is actually a pretty decent card. But it is best in a full-on mobilized deck, which we don't currently have the ability to build. Instead, we are essentially just running this as a 1-drop that, if it survives for a couple turns, it turns into a pretty good threat with that Fury and eventually a 0 operation cost. Not a lot of synergy, but can be quite good. You can also use it as like an emergency removal, with that Fury. It can possibly attack 2 to 3 times and just do, kill or 2 times, and it just, kills off a couple enemy units. You don't want to leave this, as a new player, you don't want to leave this in Smokescreen forever. Obviously, if you can get it all the way down to 0 operation cost in 4 turns and it's a 5/5, then that is obviously really good, but don't be afraid to, for example, use it when it's like a 4/4 or even a 3/3 if you're really desperate, Sometimes you just got to use it to kill something or just take the front line or something like that. Then we move on to the Swordfish, which is an actual good card. The Swordfish is a very big bomber for 1 credit. As a 1/3, it has a lot of health, and the enemy is often just not going to be able to remove it for a turn or 2, meaning that if you play this on turn 1, it's going to be very annoying for the enemy to play out small health minions, as the Swordfish will just kill them for free. It is a very solid card and is one of the core cards that we could commit to and start building British Air, which we'll talk about that in a minute. Kind of following on the heels of that is Air Superiority. Air Superiority is essentially just a super cheap removal, which is actually really nice. 1 credit to deal 3 damage if we control an air unit is just really solid. And especially in Britain, it's important to note that we do not have hard removal. Britain is not a nation that is really known for having its own hard removal. We have a couple things, but they're often very situational and mostly against tanks. So having something like air superiority, and if you're whatever ally you end up using, try to make sure to run some removal from that nation with Britain. This is what air superiority does. We only have the one copy because we don't have enough cards, but this gives us a nice just a one-time thing of just being able to kill something for super cheap. Pairs very well with the swordfish and pretty much every other air unit we run. Then we have the 5th Brigade. 5th Brigade is sadly not that good. It is just very weakly statted. 1-5, it doesn't have the attack to do anything to really hurt much, and as such, this is a card that if you start replacing stuff, I highly recommend you start removing 5th Brigades. There just isn't much of a reason to be using 5th Brigade, and as such, we're mostly just running it because it's better than some of the really bad options, but it's definitely just one of the weakest cards. At best, it buys us a little bit of time, and we can occasionally use it to like protect like stuff with Resolute Defense or protect a swordfish, but otherwise it just isn't very good right now and probably won't ever be. So I recommend removing this as soon as you can, and there's a lot of options too. But moving on from that, we have Fortification. Fortification is our primary healing in the deck. Britain is one of the best control nations, and Fortification helps a lot by giving us a strong amount of healing. This helps us survive aggro and burn and other similar effects, and can make it hard for the enemy to actually kill us. Fortification struggles not with a lot, to be honest. The worst thing is that it's slow, but this deck is very happy to take the game in a slower manner, and we have a lot of guards in order to build up a board that will protect us when we do actually use Fortification. Overall, just kind of like one of those staple control cards that you always can just run a couple copies and you'll never be sad about it. Then we have CONVOY HX. CONVOY HX is 3 credits, draw 2 cards. This is just like a staple of practically almost any British deck. The exact amount of copies can vary, but for us, this is our main card draw, so we're running more copies. If you end up, I actually ended up crafting an extra Convoy and an extra Fortification with the 2 standard cards. So that's why I have 3 copies of each. You'll need to craft them with the 2 standard cards you get from, I think, level 8. Convoy HX 175, good card draw. This is just a staple thing. It's just going to give us some card draw and help us make sure we don't run out of cards too quickly. Really just solid card. Then we move on to Amphibious Assault. This is some of our Japanese removal, and is pretty efficient Japanese removal. Being able to kill anything with 3 attack or less is very useful against a lot of aggro decks. We can blow up a lot of, cheap tanks or, a lot of early game units, and we can also make a strong benefit. We can do a lot of work against guards. A lot of guards have low attack, so if we're playing other control decks, this can actually be very useful at blowing up some massive guard they play. It also just has the utility that sometimes you get to hit like certain utility units, because there's a good amount of very powerful units that are often low in stats because their main effect is like a deployment effect or like a passive effect. So Amphibious Assault is just very useful, and again helping us fill that very important removal niche that Britain otherwise lacks. Then we move on to Naval Operation. This is a prime and really strong stalling tool. The 1 damage is nice and can occasionally be really useful to finish off or ping off low health units, but really it's the pin all enemy ground units that is really, really useful. You're able to just really, just brick wall the enemy from just like taking their turn. If they have a lot of big tanks out, Naval Operation can, for very cheap, pin them all, deal a little bit of damage, and maybe give you time to find some more removal or build up some more guards and hopefully outlast them. A useful card to help us control the board. Then we have the elite that is we gotten from National Progression, the P40 KITTYHAWK. Just a really good card all around. That deployment effect is incredibly useful and just is able to oftentimes kill an early game unit and still put out a fighter for us to use in future. It's just overall a really solid card. And it's important to note that this says ground target, so it can actually hit the enemy HQ. That is something that doesn't come up a lot, but can be game-winning when you use it to kill off an enemy HQ that is just barely out of reach of dying. So just don't forget that. But overall, really good. Then we have Coldstream Guards. Coldstream Guards gives us the card Naval Support when we play it, which sets a unit's attack to be equal to a unit's defense. So if you use it on Coldstream Guards, you make a 4/4. If you use it on something like 5th Brigade, it becomes a 5/5. Overall, not the strongest thing. It can be a surprise effect mainly, but really the big thing is that Coldstream Guards is here as another kind of filler card. It's better than other options, and as such, we mainly are just running it because we can. It does kind of help with certain things like the 5th Brigade, which I just talked about, by allowing us to add some extra attack, but it's just a bit poorly statted and overall just a bit hard to really make work. If you're going to start removing cards, I would probably recommend this is another card you look to remove. As Coldstream, if you really want to commit to it, you can, but I gotta warn you, as a new player, that your wild cards and whatnot are going to eventually become essentially wasted, as this strategy, as the naval support strategy with low attack but high health guards, it doesn't work at higher levels because people are just too good at just killing your stuff and all that, and it doesn't work out. So I just be very careful if you're going to do this strategy, because it can be effective early on, but it falls off late game. So just be careful with that. Then we have the Lancashire Fusiliers. This is just a really big infantry. It is similar to the 980 Volks. We don't see this as much as the 980 Volks because it is a bit more expensive, and Britain is not the best at aggressiveness, but just simply having such a massive unit can be really useful, especially as a starter. It's able to trade down a lot of units and is overall just really effective at just, kind of beating the enemy down. It can help us apply pressure while also just acting as a strong removal. Just be careful of trying to play this down when the enemy is attacking your HQ. Maybe try to play guards or removal. Try to get this down when the enemy took a slow turn, as then they have to respond to it. Then we move on to the 22nd Guards Brigade. 22nd Guards Brigade is also not the greatest of things. It's just a bit poorly statted. Although we can give tanks and infantry units +1/+1, which can be quite useful. It takes a lot of work to do that because you need 2 other units on the ground next to each other, and then you play this, and then you have to move those units. It's just a very expensive kind of thing, and it just takes, I think, a little bit too long to really get going. And as such, it's not bad, but it's also not particularly good. So, I would try to use this when you can actually get both buffs on it, because then it's technically a 4/7, which is a lot of stats, and it's spread out so it can make your other guards stronger. But I would just be careful. Try not to play this out if it's on its own, as that's actually really bad. Then we move on to the A6M2 ZERO. The Zero is a really, really good card. It is a well-statted plane at 4/4. It has ambush, so the enemy has a hard time attacking into it. And its deployment deals 1 damage. Really, really nice card. It just overall really just does almost anything you could really want. It gives us a bit of removal, it can ping off low health enemy units, or it can do some sneaky stuff like pinging an enemy unit. Like if an enemy unit has 5 health and then you play the deployment effect on it, suddenly the enemy will not be able to use that unit to kill the 0 due to the ambush. Also note that the 1 damage can hit the enemy HQ, so again, similar to the KITTYHAWK, don't forget about that. It also helps to turn on air superiority, and overall the 0 is just a really good 5-drop. For a budget player, this is like just such a rock solid, unit. Really, really good. Then we have the Osaka Regiment. This is a really big guard. 4/7 is a lot of stats, and essentially we're using it as a budget version of a British special, the Grenadier Guards, which are even bigger. But this one just does it really, really well. The Osaka Regiment just, comes down. The enemy is going to have to absolutely trade usually 2 units into it, or a unit and a removal card. The Osaka Regiment is just hard for the enemy to remove. So as a new player, this can be very good. It also has a low operation cost, so it can very easily be moved into the front line and represent a big stonewall that the enemy has to work through. Then we move on to the Churchill Mark IV. The Churchill is a bit lackluster. It is slow, expensive to operate, and it has that really kind of sucky low attack. It just doesn't have really enough attack to be worth playing. There is always the ability to use the naval support on it, but that's not, again, consistent and is weak to removal. Really, the biggest thing that it can do is that heavy armor can make it extra hard for the enemy to deal with if they're playing a lot of aggressive units. But again, it also just only has 2 attack. It's not the greatest guard in the world, but for our purposes, it helps us fill out the deck, and it can be a decent threat and just overall kind of hard to remove. Then we have the Type 3 Chinu. The Chinu is a 4/5 tank with ambush and guard while it's in your support line. A really good guard, actually. It is very good at blanking a lot of smaller units. That ambush makes it annoyingly difficult to trade into with small units, often eating 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 of them. And it just can be very annoying for the enemy to deal with. On top of that, because it's a tank, it can also move and attack on the same turn, meaning it can start attacking, like an annoying artillery piece or a bomber, or even just attacking the enemy HQ for the win. Overall, just a really solid, just 5-drop guard. Then we move on to Blade of the Samurai. This is just a hard removal. It's 6 credits, kill an enemy unit, no questions asked. Really useful to just have a blank removal like this. Just an important tool. Just nice to have all around. It's your way to deal with something that you otherwise could never deal with, whether that's something that has been buffed a million times or some massive tank that the enemy played, stuff like that. Excellent answer to it. Then we have carpet bombing, one of the staples of British control. It is just so good. It clears boards. It just is just like, honestly, all I can say is that if you're going to play Britain and you have a special wild card you can use, get a second carpet bombing. It is just like it is the premium card in Britain right now. And if you're a budget player or a new player or whatever, you want to have 2 carpets in your deck practically. Almost no questions asked. You almost always want 2 carpets. It's just amazing. Then we have the 9.2 coastal howitzer. Or coastal gun. So this is a pretty big artillery piece. At 4/4, it is able to kill a lot of stuff and can be quite threatening. And when it attacks, your HQ heals. It is very slow, and I think that overall it's not the greatest thing, but we need 1 or 2 really big threats, and a big artillery piece like this can do the job decently well. So making the coastal gun able to, it also heals us, so it can help us push our HQ even harder to kill. But usually this is meant to be somewhat of a finisher, I guess, in that after you've locked down the board, you play the coastal gun behind some guards, and then it just becomes unkillable and is just extremely annoying to remove. And then the final card is a card I crafted with my one limited card, Lend-Lease. This is a big draw card. In order to help support our convoys, I wanted to have another card draw, and Lend-Lease is the best budget option. It is very slow, but it can give us a strong refill in the late game, which is very useful to help us keep going and dig for more removal and more guards and all that. So that is the deck. In the Mulligan, let's talk about that. The Mulligan, I would look for our 1-drops of the Swordfish, the 1st Airborne, Air Superiority, 5th Brigade also, and then probably look for some Convoys, KITTYHAWKs, and stuff like Amphibious Assault. Those are probably going to be our best options. As the game goes on, you want to be playing down guards and using removal. You essentially are just wanting to keep the board clear, heal up, and not die. Take it slow, take it easy. Sometimes it is okay to save removal, and this is something that you'll just kind of learn as you play, but it is sometimes okay to just slowly wear down that, 980 Volksgrenadier instead of using Amphibious Assault, because then you can save the Amphibious for something you absolutely have to kill. Like some really annoying tank or something that is just going to snowball out of control. It is just going to be... It's just an important thing, and you'll learn that as time goes on. Carpet bombing, if you can try to use Naval Operation to stall the board into a big carpet bombing. That can be absolutely devastating against other people, especially if they don't see it coming or are unable to really play around it. It's a really strong combination, and carpet, as I said, is just like a key card. You're eventually just wanting to have so many guards that the enemy just kind of breaks against your wall of guards, and then you have stuff like the Zero and stuff like the coastal gun, alongside maybe like the Swordfish and the Lancashire Fusiliers, and the enemy essentially dies after they've run themselves out of cards. Overall, it's not the best strategy, and unlike the German one that I did previously, it's a bit more loose in what it does. But I want to just quickly go over some things that you could look to run in order to improve that. The first thing I'm going to start recommending is the Spitfire archetype. The Spitfire archetype is made up of running the Spitfires alongside, let me find it, the RAF ground crew. The ground crew is a limited, but alongside a handful of Spitfires can make some really big and really cheap Spitfires. And when paired with a lot of guards and a lot of removal, it can absolutely perform as a win condition, especially mainly as a new player. So that is an option to go into. You are essentially, I would recommend probably cutting things like Churchills and 22nd Guards and the coastal gun, and then find room for some RAF ground crews and some of the Spitfires. You'll mainly have access to the Mark 1s and the Mark 5s. If you want to have some extra wild cards, you could also look to get the Spitfire Mark II, as it's one of the cheapest Spitfires and works well with guards. Or you could even go for the Polish Spitfire Mark V, which, because it's Exile, we get to run it in any deck with Britain, so it works extremely well. And that deployment effect can make our guards, allows us to buff up our guards, or it can turn something like the Fusiliers into a guard, which is a really big thing. But that can be a very effective way to take it. Another way to take it is with British Air, which is making like more Swordfish. And overall, we want to get some bombers, some cheap bombers in here. We want to get some cheap fighters like the Gladiator and the Claude and the Buffalo in here. And then we want to use orders like Air Superiority and get more of those. Also, make sure to get close air support, as that allows us to buff our bombers and whatnot into astronomically high levels. Oh, also, for the Spitfire deck, you may want to run 1 or 2 emergency measures. That can be highly effective by giving us super cheap and very powerful removal, even if we do end up losing a Spitfire in the process. But for British Air, you want to use those. You also want to use, let me find it. Dawn Operations could be quite powerful. That's a new card that we've seen. We also can have, you could try Burning Sun. It's a bit expensive, but could be potentially quite powerful. Where is it? Precision Bombing, there it is. This gives us a hard removal option with our numerous bombers, and that can be very effective. Overall, helping us fill kind of that role that we lack. You could also invest into Empire Strikes, being a powerful board clear if we have some bombers. So that's another way to take it. I would say those are probably the 2 best ways to take it. Again, I know I said before you could potentially go into the naval support archetype and really build your deck around a bunch of low health guards and actually run naval supports. I recommend against that. It's not a good archetype. It really struggles if enemies start running a lot of removal, which as you climb the ladder they naturally do. So I would be very careful going into that. You could also go into a controlling deck. However, it's a bit hard to get into control deck this early. A lot of the win cons of Britain are not really here at the moment. Namely, Commonwealth and Rule Britannia both are elites that you'd have to craft, or in the case of Rule Britannia, you'll want to purchase the Theaters of War. So actually, we'll be, in the next video, we're going to take a look at the British Theater of War deck, which gets Rule Britannia, and we'll explain how that really changes the game and lets you build into British control. But that's for another video. Hopefully this video is useful and it can help you. Britain is definitely, I think, one of the hardest nations to start with, so when we kick it off, feel free to experiment, but I highly recommend starting with this deck and improving it in a couple ways that I listed. But that is, I think, going to be it for the moment. I want to thank everybody so much for watching. Next time, we'll see. Next time with the British budget series, we're going to, as with Germany, purchase either Theaters of War or the Catalyst expansion and see how that radically changes it. Because there definitely are, Britain gets some very high impact cards from those. So I want to thank everybody so much for watching and have a good day. Oh, also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I forgot to mention that, but it really does help the channel. I've grown a lot more than I really expected to in quite a short time frame, so I'm glad everybody's enjoying it. And for real this time, thank you and have a good day.